We're streaming. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. We're streaming and ready to go when you're ready.
Okay, well, let's call the meeting to order then. I'm Ken Johnson, and I am the temporary chair of this meeting. Calling the meeting to order. I see the first thing on the agenda is chair election, so that makes it easy. First question I have for Ian is, do we have a quorum?
Hi, Mr. Chair. Yes, we do. And I have a message from the incumbent chair, Richard Lindsay. He sends his regrets today and wanted to mention that he is very excited about continuing on the commission, but would at this time step down from consideration as chair. So I spoke to him last week and he asked me to convey that.
Okay, thank you, Ian. So do we actually have a quorum that we could elect a chair?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. So who would like to be chair?
Are we taking nominations from the floor?
Well, that's a good place to start, certainly, yes. Let's take nominations from the floor.
Ken, how do you feel about taking on the chair's job on an ongoing basis?
Well, I'm getting awful old, you know. Yeah, I'll be chair for the next year, and as long as somebody's prepared, if I should have to step back for health reasons, which I don't have any currently, but I'm now well into my 80s, so it could be any time.
Let's knock on wood, and hopefully all don't have the same concern. But yeah, certainly, if you need to, is there a vice chair option in this committee, or how does that work for alternates?
A vice chair would be something we should have, yes.
Yeah, okay.
So anyone like to volunteer their services for vice chair? Can't be too onerous. Sandra?
I will.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra.
Any further?
Since nobody was nominating me, I just nominated myself.
That's the best thing to do sometimes, yeah.
It shows your commitment to the task.
Well, I'll do the usual. Any further nominations? Any further nominations? Any further nominations? Hearing none, I shall be chair and Sandra shall be vice chair for the next 1 year. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it might be, sorry to be a stickler, but it might be helpful if we simply we hold a vote on chair and vice chair positions, and so you could ask for anyone opposed.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what you did, but
anyone opposed? All in favor? I got more hands for in favor than I did for opposed. Thank you.
thanks.
Moving on, next page. Approval of the agenda. This is a special Heritage Commission, so there's only one item on the agenda. And it's a referral to the draft Colwood Heritage Strategy. So anyone like to approve the agenda?
I'll approve the agenda.
Thank you, Jeff. Second by Mark. I got your hand there, Mark. Thank you. All in favor? Hands up. Thank you. Okay, the agenda is now approved. Because it's a special Heritage Commission, I'm not going to ask for any other items on the agenda. I don't think that would be appropriate at this time. So adoption of the minutes from February 17th meeting. Anyone like to move the adoption of the minutes from February 17th? Just raise your hand. Thank you, Mark. Seconded by Second by Michael. Thank you, Michael. Any discussion? Any changes or alterations to the minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes, so indicate. Thank you. And public participation. Are any members of the public here at the meeting? This call would actually allow public participation in committee meetings?
Yes, Mr. Chair. At this time, there are two options for the public to take part. One is to either log in via Zoom and contribute as a delegation or to make a comment at this portion of the agenda via Zoom. You can also partake passively through viewing the YouTube stream. And then there's the second form of participation, which is in person at council chambers. So we have the council chambers set up now for in-person participation.
Thank you. Well, not being there, I can't tell if anybody's sitting in the council chambers.
There's no one at this time at the council chambers.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, activity reports from members. Anyone doing anything very interesting these days? No, I did some more research on the thermopile monument at Royal, I won't say Royal Roads, at Esquimalt Lagoon on the Spit. And I did some research on how it actually got there. It, of course, was erected by the Thermopylae Club, as many members know. What you may not know is at the time it was erected, that property was owned by the Department of Defense. So they had to get permission from the Department of Defense to put it there. And according to the information I have, the department deeded that property to the Thermopylae Club so they could put that monument there. The monument is concrete with a nice BC government type plaque. And the anchor embedded in the concrete was dug up from the dockyard supply stores. So it came from a very authentic source. And the bollards were donated by Capital Iron, which at that time was still had a lot of ship stuff laying around, as some of us may remember. So I've got some further work to find out. How did Colwood end up with the Thermopylae Club's deeded property? So, anything else from anyone?
Not that it relates to Colwood's work at the moment, no, but we are working with another community on the other side of the island with similar heritage conversations. So part of what heritage solutions that Colwood is putting forward, we're actively sharing with other communities that we're working with.
Okay, and I'm sure that we'll hope perhaps that they benefit from our trials and tribulations, Mark, if we have any. So moving on, Ian, I'm going to turn this over to you for the draft Colwood Heritage Strategy. Anything to say pertaining to that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your election. As outlined in the cover report before you, the Heritage Strategy Project team is now at a point where we're seeking feedback on the first public draft. As you're aware, this document is compiled over the last 7 months and is based on the results of a public survey that was promoted to all Colwood households, various stakeholder interviews, and 2 workshops with commission members. The draft strategy contains sections focusing on critical background information, emerging issues in heritage, Colwood's heritage values, heritage conservation goals, and a total of 12 draft recommendations. An implementation plan section and cost estimates will be added to the final draft as informed by the next phase of community consultation. So for that next step, staff are proposing that the commission recommend to council that the draft Colwood Heritage Strategy be endorsed for referral to the Esquimalt, Songhees, and Chanu First Nations for comment before seeking public and stakeholder input. Our consultant, our heritage consultant, Maria Stambro, will now walk us through the draft strategy, and we're happy now to take input from the commission on the draft. Thank you.
Just a point of order, Chair, to Ian. I did go through the pages. So if we take ourselves to page 7 of the document, in section 13.211, building understanding, we make a reference to the Sauk Nation there, and yet we've not included them in before. If you look at the recommendation on the top of the page, it only looks at Scout Nation. So there's a bit of confusion there. What's the relationship with Colwood vis-a-vis Sauk Nation in this building and understanding statement?
Through the chair, and thank you for that question, Member Salter. Yeah, we focused on the 3 First Nations outlined in the recommendation based on previous input from the local First Nations in terms of their interest in terms of the traditional territories that they feel are fall under their communities' interest and historical importance. We have in the past referred work to the Sauk First Nation, and most recently our archaeological overview report for the Waterfront Stewardship Plan. So we are, when appropriate, referring information to that nation.
So as it relates to this heritage report, this is consistent, and if Sauk were to see this, they wouldn't feel like they haven't been spoken to properly. They would understand the context of that paragraph then.
Through the chair, I can't say that they would. I mean, happy to take direction from a recommendation from the commission in terms of ways in which we should be bringing this forward to local First Nations. As I said, we focused on the 3 in the recommendation based on input we've received in the past in terms of where Colwood sits relative to their understanding of their traditional territories. And but certainly happy to cast a wider net in terms of consultation with local First Nations.
I must first of all back up and say that the process of this release of the policy by directly sharing this now directly with the nations is a good cultural protocol to get their input from its said. Again, the good and bad part of that is that the local nations, the Sangis and the Kosamson or Squamish Nation, the Lekwungen speaking peoples, their relationship with the Beecher Bay makes sense. The Sauk may not necessarily be, it may not make sense to them. So being prepared to understand how Sauk fits into this conversation will be something that your staff would need to be able to address with Sauk and the Sangis and Squamish Nations as to why they're included. So as long as there's been a pattern of sharing and openness before, and it's not something different, that'd be good. If it's something new, then it's going to be a bit of it could be a problem. So I just want to bring it up to make it clear that I found it confusing when I read it because the recommendations make sense because it's overlapping territories, the Colwood's boundaries with those 3 nations. Then reading on that Sauk is being included in some building understanding. I just found it not clear. So others might find the same.
Thank you. So we'll take that under consideration in terms of the draft, and I'll certainly raise that as something to discuss with the project team.
And then one other item that I just want to put forward is if we go to page 19 in the report, there are some images shown there. I've seen these images before. Bottom page, I know the artists. I've had this conversation with the artists where they did another version of the same painting. Some community members find this particularly offensive, given that community members are shown topless, men and women. Not something that's necessarily a true reflection of the values of the nation's hold, certainly. And then some would find this offensive. I find it disconcerting that we're sharing it. I know it's been endorsed by the CRD and has a BC stamp on it, and that sort of seems to be an appropriate choice for some. But having met the artists who created this work and having that conversation with at the very time, reflecting elders' conversations when I was at one time working with the Songhees Nation. I think that a better choice could be made for this photograph, this depiction, if we have a chance to make this adjustment. Just to want to make that aware.
Thank you. And I should mention I may have been a bit confusing in my introduction. So Maria is going to walk us through the document now, and certainly can speak to some of the comments that were just made by Member Salter. And we're happy to take feedback like that before bringing this forward for, as we recommended, local First Nation comment. So Mr. Chair, would I be able to pass the floor to Ms. Stambro?
Beg your pardon, Ian?
I wonder if Maria could be given an opportunity to walk us through the draft.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Maria, are you ready to go then?
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And thank you for your feedback in advance of walking through the draft. It's all very helpful, very useful. And to let you know that this very much is a draft, and I'll do a walkthrough and you can interrupt me at any point. Here we go. I'm going to share my screen, which is the draft strategy. Hopefully you can all see that. I will trust that you can. And I just want to acknowledge, well, first of all, the territory that we're working on, the Algonquin-speaking people, and the three First Nations that we have identified through city direction in this draft strategy as the work that we're doing, and also to really recognize the involvement and the engagement of the Community Heritage Commission. Ian continues to ask me if I think this is an innovative document, if this is really what the CHC had set out as being a national leader. And I truly think it is. And I think that is because of the direction from the CHC and your engagement with this process. So I just want to start off with that. And to let you know, the images that we've used in this are gathered from a few different spaces and places. The first number of images are from the Royal BC Museum archives, from the Friends of Coal Island provided some, the City of Colwood provided some, and also Royal Roads Archives. Jenny Seaman was really helpful in getting us images. I just want to acknowledge that in the process too. So it begins with the acknowledgement, the land acknowledgement, and this image itself, just as a heads up, will be replaced. It's kind of a holder image. A number of them don't have quite the quality that we need, but we will provide something similar to this in the next round of the drafts. Acknowledgements, again, will complete these at the end. This image from the construction of the Hatley Castle is from Royal Roads Archives, and it's really interesting that it's one of the few I've ever seen that shows the workers engaged in the process. So we were trying to represent images that we don't necessarily always see around heritage for Colwood. The table of contents is not very exciting. I really want to highlight the introduction, and the fourth paragraph down, I think, is really the embodiment of how this heritage strategy is really cutting edge, really capturing the momentum of the time and where this is being created. And I'll just read it here. The cultural environment for the city's heritage strategy is one that seeks diversity and equity, recognizes the importance of reconciliation and indigenizing heritage planning, and looks to connect all members of the community to heritage. This provides an atmosphere of innovation and inclusion in the heritage planning process, which is reflected in the values, goals, recommendations, and actions of the strategy. So from the CHC, we got really clear direction that you want to see how these fit together: values, goals, recommendations, and actions. And also this spirit of taking what is in the environment right now and putting it into action, into a strategy. So I wanted to sort of highlight that as I present this. The image on the right on the screen is from the Friends of Coal Island. Again, this is a low resolution image. It was given to us in this process, and we're hoping to be able to use a higher resolution image. So for the history of Colwood, starting with the First Peoples, there are a number of images to be confirmed here. This would be where we take the draft strategy to the local First Nations and ask them about the use of these images. They were images that were approved by the Royal BC Museum Archives, and they do a screening process when they share images, but we did want to do that next step where we actually get the feedback directly from the First Nations. And we also would like to get feedback on the text. And I can't see you all. So if I'm talking and you want to say something, you might just have to interrupt me. Ken has his hand up. Okay.
So you've used in the previous page, where you use the phrase indigenizing heritage planning. So this is a new phrase to me. I have read Gwen Bridges' paper in Planning West a year or two ago, and it had some interesting suggestions, some of which I agree with, others I don't. So what is meant here by indigenizing heritage planning? Is that which Gwen outlined in her paper, or is it something else?
Well, Gwen is one of the key consultants on this project. And yes, I would say it's very much informed by her approach and her ideas. And her approach is informed by working in the field for the last 20 years. And when I ask her about, I say, indigenizing heritage planning, indigenizing planning is a new thing for me. And she said, oh, we've been having these discussions in our communities since 2010 at least, if not earlier. So the actual indigenizing heritage and indigenizing planning is given more space later in the document with more explanation about what that means.
It is, but I've spent the last 40 years doing studies in history and ethnology, and I've never seen any sign of planning within the traditional Indigenous communities on the West Coast.
I don't know if I can speak to that, or if we want to go through that right now. We can maybe speak to that more when we get to those sections.
Situation, okay.
The next section speaks to European settlement. This is an image of Captain Langford's house.
Again, I'm sorry, Gwen, I got to go back on the next page again.
Oh, okay.
In your document, you've included the phrase on page 3. Around 1782, a smallpox epidemic hit Vancouver Island. Can you tell me where that source came from?
I can. It's referenced there in footnote number 3. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, now I got to move over. I can't read the page because, of course, I've got this other thing in the way. I'll have to close that down. No, that didn't work either.
Just to be clear, it's showing us, I believe it's showing after the word epidemic, it says I think it has the number 1 there, but it's hard to tell. It's blue on my screen.
Oh, okay. It's 1 then.
So that's from reference number 1?
Mm-hmm. Which is at the end of the document. And we did review all the references after speaking to the Community Heritage Commission previously.
Okay, well, I don't know if Mr. Harris's document actually referred to Vancouver Island. No, I'd have to review that paper then, if it's available. One of the difficulties is taking references like that. Quite often, they are not available.
Okay.
I'm with Ken on this one. I've never understood that to be a fact here in that era. That 1792 is the timeline of Perez's arrival on the coast and his engagement with the nations here. I wasn't aware that that was ever there was this issue on the mainland and others in that timeline, but this is the first contact of Spanish in this area as in the 1790s. So.
Okay, we can review that footnote in that document again. Absolutely. So moving forward to the European settlement, if there's anything on that, this timeline is pulled primarily from the city's website, and some of these dates were questioned, and we reviewed those with Jenny Seaman from the archives at Royal Roads and confirm the dates that are here now. And then Colwood today with this image again, where it's given to us from the Friends of Coal Island. Probably a lower resolution image than we want, and we're hoping to get a higher one. So what is heritage? So you identified already, Mark, that you would prefer not to use these images, or at least the one at the bottom and the one at the top as well, Mark?
The one at top is, I believe, is the billboards at Heron House, down at offshore, but at Royal Roads, as I recall. I haven't. I know the artist who carved that, and but the language on the posters or signs that are there, I'm not conversant with it now, but I know of that space. As a depiction of heritage, I think Heron House, as it's situated next to the water, and its structure and style would be a much better depiction of Coast Salish heritage if it was taken a little more flattering shot. As I understand, this is the service side of the building. So we're not really giving our First Peoples heritage a really good viewpoint here. And as we've said, now we've mentioned twice the Coal Island ammunition depot. I mean, that's a place where the bombs were kept, and has an interesting connection with our First Peoples through the Tessamatsa family, who we are Colwood is on their traditional home. And it's a good story and a not so good story. So I'm not sure if I like the Coal Island imagery as part of Colwood's heritage going forward. It's a military reference, and it has a mixed history.
Mr. Chair, we're going to not get anywhere if we're going to approach the review of this paper with this, because these are all controversies we're going to get into, with each example that comes up. And so I'm not sure, Mr. Chair, what's the best way to go forward here, and if this is helpful for the consultant to have this approach, because I would disagree that we do need to have reference to Coal Island, and we do have to acknowledge that that is part of the heritage of the city of Colwood. So to ignore it is not really, in my view, a wise and useful way to move forward on the plan. So how should we, my question is, how should we proceed here to make sure that we're providing the best advice? Because I don't think we're going to approve this today, right? We're going to review and then go away and come up with feedback. Is that the plan?
The goal of today is the recommendation that Ian read, and that's really to get direction to take this to council for referral to the local First Nations.
Hi, Mr. Chair. And I'll maybe jump in and mention that the cover report outlines some options for the commission at this juncture. So we recognize you haven't had a chance to provide us input on this draft. So the recommendation is to move forward with engagement with local First Nations. And I think any input that would help that next phase would be helpful for us to understand. Additional input on the draft could be made to staff through a motion by the commission that could come potentially at the end of our presentation, and would be happy to action any approve a motion from the commission.
Thank you, Ian. I had already prepared 3 options to present to the committee when we get to the very end. One of which was to approve with changes, and not to approve. So that would pretty much cover these type of things. I agree with Jeff. You may recall that we all spent a great deal of time in truth and reconciliation. And truth is something that we all strive for. And Coal Island is there. It's part of our heritage. It's true. We cannot deny it. When we present heritage to our community, And, I've been using the page here has a statement. All peoples contribute to the diversity and richness of civilizations and cultures, which constitute the common heritage. So this is a heritage we share with First Nations. I've had recent discussions with some people in the city of Victoria. And of course, heritage and history didn't start and stop in 1846. There were peoples here before, and there is a heritage. And after 1846, there is a common heritage. And we share Coal Island with the First Nations. It's there. We share residential schools with the First Nations. It's there. So while we may object to people with their breasts exposed, true, it was common in First Nations before 1846 and long thereafter. So I think we have to take a broader scope on this. So I'll let you move on, Maria.
I will unmute myself and start. I'm not sure if there's anything else to add here. I do want to just recognize that heritage is fraught, and that is really where heritage is right now in the larger landscape. And the idea that there is a dark side to heritage is very much being understood and recognized. And I think that's hopefully not something that we erase in this heritage strategy, but something that we acknowledge through this process as well. Okay, and this is a background to the heritage strategy as well as the legislation that is informing it very much so in the context today, the legislation from the Local Government Act and the legislation from acts such as DRIPA and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. The next section of this, I feel like in viewing it here, I would like this to be strengthened moving forward. And in terms of just explaining the different elements of this, it's a very basic outline of what the legislation is, what the municipal heritage tools are. The idea with this was really to accentuate this idea of the question of what value does heritage have? And one of the things to illuminate that is on the right-hand side with this sense of identity, community cohesion, the different elements. This is from a webinar given by the National Trust of Canada that was really looking at the economics around heritage and why did the provincial and federal governments create incentives and ways to protect heritage, because there's a sense that the market doesn't capture all the benefits that heritage brings. And so on the left-hand side, you're given the tools to incentivize, protect heritage, because there's this idea of market failure in terms of heritage. So that's what this is about. I think it demands a few more definitions and explanation, and that will definitely be in the process as we move forward. Again, if I can't see you, please just feel free to speak up. The purpose of the heritage strategy is here. This is a great image. I quite love this image. I think this is from the city's archives of a bus that used to run from Colwood to Metchosin, probably some other stops along the way. The process is described in the next section, and the vision and the mission are taken from the project statement that started this whole project and have been adapted somewhat. So that's recognized in the footnote that where this comes from and how it's been adapted through conversations with the Community Heritage Commission. The process isn't finished yet, so we imagine that we will be going back and adding to and potentially revising this section. Some really interesting images. These are workers from Hatley Castle, an image again borrowed from, well, given to us to use from Royal Roads archives. And then emerging issues in heritage. This is really a temperature of the environment of heritage today. So here we have a longer description of what indigenizing planning is, and perhaps this addresses some of Ken's concerns, but it's, I think right now we're having a real conversation and planning in general around decolonization and indigenizing and what that means and how that is. In the previous discussion with the Community Heritage Commission, decolonizing was seen as perhaps not the direction that we want to go, but indigenizing provided more of a, I guess more of a blend, like an idea that we know where we're going to, or not we know where we're going to go, but we have a place to move forward towards. Whereas decolonizing was a sense of, are we moving backwards? Where are we going with this? What are we hoping to achieve? So we used indigenizing planning as a framework for this. And then other emerging issues such as intangible cultural heritage. To me, as a heritage planner, this is really exciting. This is new. This is not in previous heritage strategies. And this is where Colwood is going with his approach to heritage. Monuments.
Well, let's just a moment then, Maria, let's discuss this if we may. Go back one, thank you, thank you. So essentially, we are introducing a concept in the Colwood Heritage Strategy that has never been tried before elsewhere, in what you've said. And although I think we all agree that Indigenous communities should be part of planning, I'm not aware, as I said before, of traditional planning processes in West Coast communities, Indigenous communities. They were a top-down structure. There were title holders and they did planning, but they didn't ask the commoners or the slaves or anybody else. It was within their kin group what they were going to do.
Mr. Chair, I was just, I don't think it's meant that way. The term isn't about a planning approach that's Indigenous. It's about including the Indigenous voice in planning. I do agree with you that indigenizing anything is a term that is people are saying whether or not it is a good use of the term. When I speak to Indigenous colleagues that are involved with this kind of work, they are using decolonizing, but to the point around what indigenizing means, I think maybe Mark probably has a bit more experience at this. Mark, can you add?
No, and I appreciate that, Jeffrey. And to Ken's comments specifically, I'm having a real difficulty with the fourth paragraph on this page and this idea of introducing indigenized planning as without a lot of pretexts.
I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, opening up. We're not giving it a fulsome recognition. And to say something that to this effect, an Indigenous concept of planning can be quite different is a pejorative statement. And then to state up Indigenous communities may need to address modern issues such as economic development and food security, similar to non-Indigenous communities, is completely, absolutely revolting because that's not knowing the cultural traditions of our First Peoples to any particular state, and to make that kind of a statement and have the Colwood stand behind it, our Indigenous partners are going to be particularly put out for this. We could, and I think this is where Jeffrey brought up earlier, and to move this forward, I mean, the debate about imagery and some of the texting, it needs to be a more fulsome conversation for sure, because that particular statement is not going to get us very far down the road to in reconciliation with our First Peoples, because that's completely and utterly false. But if you only look at Indigenous or community development and community planning, as it were, from a Western perspective, then you're going to have a different view of our First Peoples. However, if you look at from a worldview from our international communities of First Peoples, the cultural setups and creativities were unique to each one. And there was certainly not and to use Ken's terms, a top-down approach to anything. It was a more of a flattened work structure in the community. And then as part of our work, that's what we are using as part of our planning tools with our clients and with communities across the province, is this idea that there is and never was a top-down approach. It was always community-led efforts with spokespersons to address certain issues. But we're not going to do a history lesson here today. But I think that these statements and picking up on the chair's comments around introducing indigenized planning without giving it good context puts a he's questioning it really going forward, and I'm certainly looking for more backup as well from my perspective. So this will be something we'll need to iron out this particular wrinkle.
I'm sorry, I must say I missed that part, and I fully agree with both you and Ken on this.
Josh, you have your hand up.
Unmute. There. Can you see and hear me?
Yep.
Okay, this is great. I want to agree with people who have expressed concerns with this section. I would just add that I think this section is a bit of scope creep from what the committee's mandate is. We don't control planning. We can make some recommendations to council to put some considerations into planning, but they're just recommendations. We're not going to indigenize Colwood's planning as our committee. I think what we're trying to reflect here is that we'd like to do something to reach out to Indigenous communities and bring their perspectives on heritage issues into our recommendations to Colwood's Council. So something like reflecting Indigenous priorities might be a good section to include. I'd also stay away from any sort of characterization about what Indigenous planning may have looked like once upon a time. It's not reflective of what it is now. And that's what we would be seeking. We're not seeking 200 years ago anyone's opinion on what planning might have looked like. We're asking them now. Their planning process now isn't that. It's not what Ken was talking about or what Mark was talking about. They have something now that they do. And we want to respect that. So if we can just make it something about bringing Indigenous voices into our recommendations to council that reflect priorities in Indigenous communities, I think we'd be much better off.
Thank you, Mark. Any other comments before we go any further with this? Maria, the voice of the committee seems to be thinking that perhaps that entire section needs revision. How do you feel about that?
Okay, I just want to identify too that these are emerging issues in heritage, that this isn't a direction per se to tell you, it's really to present the context of where this work is happening. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I didn't write this text under Indigenizing Planning, so this is a conversation to have with our Indigenous planning consultant who's part of the team. Unfortunately, Gwen couldn't be here today. So I can't speak specifically to how this was written, the context, that information. What I can do is, I guess what you're looking to is to take the term indigenizing planning out. I'm not sure I quite understand what you're looking for at this point.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in?
Thank you, Ian.
I think the discussion was a good one in terms of informing the project team as to how we could improve this section. Perhaps we could proceed with the presentation and then go back to the specific areas that may need additional work, and then highlight for the project team what those are, and we can go from there.
Okay, let's just move on to the next part of that page, which is intangible cultural heritage.
Yes, and this is again another, oh God, I'm not unmuted, okay. Another emerging issue is intangible cultural heritage, and this is again new for local governments addressing planning, and that's oral traditions, all these elements. So it's really a description and an explanation more of what that is and what that means moving forward.
Maria, can I ask a question about that?
Yes, absolutely.
My only concern about that is when we've talked about intangible cultural heritage, and I'm not an expert like some of the other people in the group, but we talk about intangible cultural heritage in lots of ways around Colwood. For example, we talk about the intangible cultural heritage of the gravel pit. We talk about the intangible cultural heritage of where Emily Carr painted above the gravel pit. When I read this, I was expecting a more fulsome description of intangible cultural heritage because it wasn't my understanding. Like when I look at this document, it doesn't say this is only intangible cultural heritage as it pertains to Indigenous cultural heritage. So it seems that perhaps it's missing the more fulsome explanation of what intangible cultural heritage is.
Thank you, Sandra. I tend to agree. Intangible cultural heritage includes Indigenous cultural heritage and many other aspects that we want to consider. And certainly in Colwood, we are losing our tangible cultural heritage as we sit here. I know there's things before Ian now that he may not be discussing, but I know that there's from our list from the 1960s or 1980s, the list that was reviewed, there's buildings there being considered for demolition or certainly under development. So we have to find some way to emphasize intangible cultural heritage. And it's certainly a place where we could do so. It's going to include a great deal of the Indigenous heritage, but there are other aspects, as you say, like the Emily Carr site. So perhaps,
Yeah.
Maria, we can expand upon that section.
Sure. I think maybe the way this is written, and I think it comes from the heritage world right now, which is really struggling with this language around intangible cultural heritage and Indigenous cultural heritage. So I can reframe this. I think it says in here that intangible cultural heritage can have significance for communities and peoples who are not Indigenous. It's really that there is a broader base or wider lens for intangible cultural heritage, but this can be reframed simply in terms of looking at intangible cultural heritage without reference to Indigenous cultural heritage. Just it's really written this way to explain current discussions in the world of heritage planning and just trying to articulate that. But that can definitely be strengthened.
Any other comments before we go on? Jeffrey?
I can appreciate there's some challenges with intangible cultural heritage. But I think from a structural perspective, when we just put it as a Indigenous cultural element, I think to Ken's point, I think we're missing this. And I think, who was it, Jill who said this? I think we're missing the larger settler intangible cultural heritage element. For example, on the next page, you mentioned commemoration. Commemoration is an intangible aspect of cultural heritage. So we may need to, think about how this whole section is working in terms of how we position intangible cultural heritage, because fusing it with Indigenous as it is here, basically, I think makes it difficult to work with as a concept.
Thank you.
I would second Jeffrey's comment on that. And by lumping them together on the same page, it also makes the cultural heritage of our First Peoples considered to be less than by using the word intangible versus something that's structural. So I know it's tried to explain itself that way. But before there was a gravel pit here, it was a glacial moraine. And that's a piece of intangible cultural heritage that benefited this community because it was the leftovers of a glacier. And that's not reflected anywhere, as are the trees and the rocks that are scarred by the glacier and some of the culturally modified trees. So those things are very much intangible, but we don't see them at all now. So we've got to make some references to them. But I see, lumping them together on the same page takes away from both of them. And I second Jeffrey's thoughts around those concerns as well.
Okay, we'll leave it to Maria then to look at what she can do to make that more palatable. Thank you. Maria, please go ahead.
Sure. The next two, these are emerging issues in heritage, monuments and commemoration. And we've looked at that one before, I think, in terms of the calls to action number 79 and recognizing the peoples who lived here prior to European landing and settlement. And then apologies for this under the climate change section, the image didn't transfer for some reason. There will be an image there. And that's another one of those emerging themes that is new to the discussions, I think, of heritage. Community growth, this is really the evolving nature of settlement in the area, is another key issue, emerging issue, especially as communities like Colwood and throughout BC, throughout Canada, are densifying and are dramatically changing their landscapes. So that's a consideration. And then the role of community heritage commissions is something that we found in our research, is that that's really an emerging issue. And finding a way for heritage commissions that now are working on things like intangible cultural heritage. That is new for some places, not new for other places, but it's definitely an emerging consideration with heritage commissions. And then the final element is the static versus living heritage, this concept that really looks to heritage as an evolving idea, an evolving understanding, as opposed to a static idea of a building representing all of culture for a time. So those are some of the emerging issues. So those are the emerging issues identified here. So in
I'm
terms,
sorry, Maria, could we go back to the last one, please? So in my discussions with, well, I know with Richard and others, this is an emerging issue. And again, one which we may want to develop further, because of course, many in our community, when I say heritage, and last week we had a quote heritage fair at Langford here down at the local park. They say it's all gone. Langford's got no heritage left. We've torn it all down, and their heritage is static. What they've got in the books now, pictures of old buildings they already torn down, some history, and that's it. It's not going forward. And if we have a living heritage approach, we have to have some phrasing in there that recognizes that what we are building today is the heritage of tomorrow in many respects. So I'd love to see more development of living heritage. Thank you.
and okay, I'll continue. Oh, here we go. With the heritage values, we have 4 heritage values. The one I think speaks to this question of what gets represented and how. So representing complexity, layers, and balance, so that not everything is necessary, complementary to everything else, that it might not all be working in tandem positively. But there's complexity to heritage, there's layers to it, and there's also the need to find a balance in representation. Honoring Indigenous cultural heritage is a key value that came through the surveys, and the stakeholder interviews was very important. Again, there's an image that was here that we need to share with the local First Nations for confirmation that they're okay with us using it. Recognizing the formation of settler community is key value, and then respecting the natural environment, also a key value. So the goals that we've identified through this process is this: to support relationship building as one of the key elements with both the local First Nations and also with the community members themselves. Enhance community identity, and this issue of what role does heritage have in terms of being part of a community? What does it offer? And what it can offer is an enhancing of the community identity. And we got that sense from the surveys as well, that people are really looking to have that context. And again, there's a little glitch here in some of the layout, and that can be fixed easily, so apologies for that. Efficiently implement heritage legislation. This is the first heritage strategy for Colwood, so this is really key to make sure that the legislation is implemented through the local government, that it works, that it's efficient. And finally, inform and engage residents and visitors. And this is that, how to make it relevant, how to connect people to heritage. So I don't see any hands or anything. I'll just continue forward. And the last section is recommendations. As Ian mentioned at the beginning, we did not include an implementation plan in this draft because that's going to be a lot more detailed, a lot more specific. And we wanted to first get feedback on the draft before we went into creating an implementation plan. So the recommendations would really feed into the implementation plan. This is image on the left is another one from Royal Roads. So the first one is, I guess we will revisit this, the recommendation to indigenize heritage planning. And I think this is actually one of the most important aspects in terms of innovating and innovation with this heritage strategy. So it has some very specific actions, such as develop a cultural protocol for working with the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Shkau Nation, and then support Indigenous cultural education for CHC members. That's also reflected in training and education for staff at the city. Review and amend historic sites and monuments to include First Nations, Inuit, and Métis representation as in alignment with the calls to action. Research non-Eurocentric names for places, people, and natural environments, and reconcile use of Indigenous names. That's, we start moving from the very specific into now broader approaches and broader work, and then work with local First Nations to identify sites of Indigenous cultural heritage within the city limits of Colwood and document the changes to Indigenous cultural heritage sites, both from colonization and climate change. So this is again addressing the complexity of what heritage is and how heritage is being changed by time, by development, and by the environmental changes. The second, yeah.
No, I think those are very good recommendations, Maria. But all of them are precipitated upon the agreement that we're going to have some First Nations participation in this process. And thus far, we have none. So I think they're very commendable actions, but we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here.
I'm sorry, I don't think I quite understand what you mean, because our request is to take the draft strategy to the local First Nations. That's what our next step would be. And that's generally, as I understand it, planning practice, that you would not take something very rough and very, without any kind of tangible context to First Nations. What they're asking for in engagement is that you can present a draft strategy or draft something before it goes more public, before we do the community consultation. So that is very much in process, and we have been in conversation with the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations in this process, and that was the request. Can you bring the heritage strategy to us?
So you're going to take this strategy document then to the 3 First Nations for discussion with them?
Ideally for a presentation, and yes, to get input. As I mentioned, a number of the images, for instance, we would like to get support that we use those. And the language, the context, the framing, that sort of stuff. Yes, that's what we're looking for.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have then, at that time, will the First Nations input come back to this commission?
I think that's a question for Ian, more around process.
Thanks for that, Mr. Chair. Yes, the proposal would see us coming back to the commission with any input that we receive from First Nation partners, as well as other jurisdictions, the general public and stakeholders.
Thank you.
I just had a comment on this, and I need to duck off after I make it. Like Ken, I think the recommendations here are great. And if you change the way you characterize it, based on our discussion previously about the word indigenization of planning, I think that it'll probably get us to where we want to go. And to Ken's point about not having had participation at this point, I recall we talked about this last time. I think it's important that the committee make plain its desire to engage on these topics. And then once we've made that plain, it's up to communities to decide whether they want to engage with us. So that's just something I'm going to leave out there as my thoughts on this section, and then I'm going to have to duck off the call.
Thank you. Okay, Maria, we'll go on to recommendation 2.
Okay, create an annual work plan for the Colwood Heritage Commission. The work outlined in this strategy is quite extensive. So I think the creating an annual work plan every year for the CHC is the Colwood Heritage Commission is a very important step, and it will take work internally to identify your key next steps. And also there's a recommendation under actions that you create subcommittees or specific people taking responsibility for different aspects of the work plan. Anything on that? Okay.
No, it looks like we have a few tasks ahead of us.
Okay, yes. Identify and record intangible cultural heritage. So this is looking at all those things that you've mentioned already, that things have been changing. So one of the key issues that came up was this idea of stories that are being lost, because people who have been in Colwood for a long time may be leaving or may be passing, and there was a real urgency about collecting those stories. So that is where this comes from, and that's why it's early in the recommendations. As recommendation number 3, we're looking at doing this immediately or ongoing, and this would be ideally done in partnership with also educational institutions in the community.
Okay. No comments there. Go on to 4.
Develop a heritage register. The city has a number of properties, and they're all properties listed on the inventory. The inventory is actually an old tool that doesn't have a role in the legislation. So in order to be in best practices for heritage, the goal would be to create a heritage register where you would migrate properties from the heritage inventory onto the register, as well as you're starting to identify places that have intangible cultural heritage. You could look at creating a listing for those on the heritage register as well. So it is a very key point of heritage planning. There's very specifics around this. Again, this is a very tangible one. The city has identified funding for doing this work as well.
Excellent. I can only hope that in conjunction with this, they also try to find some carrot policy that they can offer people to be on the heritage register.
And they do, they have, and that's in the recommendations as well. So ensure efficient heritage planning. This is immediate ongoing. Once the strategy is passed, this is putting the heritage strategy into practice, and that would involve training for staff in terms of what is heritage, what is a heritage register, how does it work, if you provide protection in terms of a designation or heritage revitalization agreement, how does that affect planning decisions? If someone comes with a heritage application for changing a heritage property, what does that mean? So that's really what this is. So the actions here are also fairly tangible, fairly specific, and they go as far as amending the OCP to reflect new heritage bylaws and policies, and ensuring that the information on the city's website is current and accurate. Recommendation number 6 is around building community partnerships. This came strongly from the stakeholder conversations, I would say. And so these are potential formal partnerships. You can include Parks Canada. I put them at the top of the list because they were very interested in being part of the partnership development with Colwood on heritage and sharing what they've learned over time and how they can support heritage in Colwood. So that the idea with this would be simply to start developing relationships with them through the CHC through presentations, and finding collaboration points to share.
Never figure out which camera I'm pointing at here. So Maria, within that community partnerships, here I see no First Nations listed.
This is separate from the, I guess, the earlier, and I'm not sure whether this is, we'll look at the language around this, but recommendation number 1 is really looking at developing the cultural protocol. So that would set the framework for working with the local First Nations. And that's a recommended approach for this. So that is where that comes from. And then most of the work under here is looking at that as well. We can repeat it with the community partnerships. It's similar but different. And there's a thumbs up from Mark. Can you explain what you mean by that?
I think repeating it would be important. That takes care of the ambiguity that Ken was concerned about, because it does look like it's an and/or. It should be both. So,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, I think bringing it together makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
I think we made that recommendation actually in the last draft, Maria. So it's something that we talked about before.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm sorry that didn't go in there. My apologies.
That's okay.
Yeah. Design a heritage grants program. That is one of the carrots that we're looking at. There are other carrots, such as a heritage revitalization agreement can be an incentive for someone to designate or protect their property within the options of a revitalization agreement. But a heritage grants program is one way to entice people to be on a heritage register, that if they are listed on the heritage register, then they can have access to applying for funds. And the city has made a financial commitment for next year to create a heritage grants program. This is one of the I think this is a big piece of work for the Community Heritage Commission, is really to define what this heritage grants program is, what funds would be going toward, how to review this, that sort of thing. So this, I would imagine, is one of the key elements on your annual plan for 2023. And there are a number, different communities have different things in their heritage grants program. Some specifically look at building facades, which I don't think would be relevant to a place like Colwood. Others would be looking at painting, upgrades, maintenance for heritage properties. We actually heard from a couple of heritage or properties listed on the heritage inventory that they would be really interested. As owners of those properties said, oh, that would be really helpful because it's a lot of work to maintain these sites. Recommendation number 8, update the urban forest strategy. This is an internal one primarily. There is a role for the Community Heritage Commission in identifying what significant trees the commission would like to see listed in the urban forest strategy. But it's looking at the heritage trees that are currently listed on the inventory. Those could be listed on the register. There can be this element of double support through the urban forest strategy as well, so that you can list significant trees in the urban forest strategy. And this can also be types of trees, species of trees that can be included here. And now we're moving more and more to broader vision ideas. So create opportunities to inform and engage. We do make reference to the plaque for Emily Carr and the interpretive signage that was created there. That was mentioned in a number of stakeholder engagements, and it was also in the survey, people identified that. So those sorts of moments are really important to create. So it's a way for bringing people into a context with heritage. It is a larger vision. It's not as specific as some of the other ones, so that you can see the cost is from something very, very small to something very, very great. So this will be given more explanation or more specifics in the implementation plan, but it's really that moment to create experiences for people to make a connection to heritage in the community, and especially for a lot of those sites that no longer exist. The recommendation number 10 is potentially a rather expensive one. That's establishing a community archives. That will be, I think, strongly informed by the work around capturing the history of Colwood. And in that process, you'll find people providing photos and old implements and that sort of thing in the process. So it'll be important to create a place to locate the archives. The city currently has archives, but they're not easily accessible community archives. So this will involve creating a site and potentially staffing that with an archivist. And the final two recommendations, manage at-risk sites. This really came from, in my recollection, from the CHC about the impacts of change, specifically climate change on heritage sites and what can we do about that. Extreme weather events will be a detriment to heritage sites. What we understand from what Ian has said, that the rising sea level is not a great concern for Colwood at this time, which is good news, and it has to do with much bigger, complex environmental things than I understand. But there will be other things, such as changing weather patterns that will definitely impact heritage sites. So that consideration. And then the final recommendation is really to look back and assess on the implementation. So at the end of the time frame, how has the work been going forward? How have there been changes in the legislation that have impacted heritage? And how are they reflected in the work that's being done prior to creating another heritage strategy?
Hi, Mr. Chair. And just to build off of Maria's comments, it's fair to say that sea level rise is a major concern for the city. I think what we are feeling good about is where we're at in terms of our analysis of the issue as what we understand the impacts to be, and our ability to respond through the planning work that we're undertaking with the Waterfront Stewardship Plan and the Waterfront Coastal Process Committee.
Thank you, Ian.
And the final pieces are the glossary of terms, appendices. These will all be added to as we move forward. We're hoping that these images will each be their own separate page. That way you can actually see a little bit more of what was done in the workshops. The management assessment of the Pioneer Cemetery was provided by Lees and Associates, and one of the city's recommendations to include is that we create, that we make the recommendation for a management strategy for the Pioneer Cemetery and St. John the Baptist Church as to be included in the final strategy. References, and then of course photo references, and I don't think Jenny's on the call today, but she did provide numbers for all the images from the Royal Roads archives, and we didn't have those in time to put them into the draft, but we will definitely be including them. So at this point, I can close.
Just
I'll
one.
just leave it open, I guess, and we can
Just
refer.
one thing, Maria, I noticed that we had a collection, we had a photograph there from the Wells collection at the City of Victoria Archives. The four ladies netting crabs in the lagoon. Yeah, I believe you credit it to Colwood, but it's actually a City of Victoria Archives photo.
That, yeah, and that image was provided by the City of Colwood, and the city would have the reference for that, which we could include.
Okay. Any discussion?
I'd just like to say, thanks, Maria, for all the improvements you've made. And it's certainly, you've advanced the document. I think it's been, there's been some good parts to it. I'm not sure if we're at this point ready for it to go to Indigenous communities for discussion. I think, as far as I'm concerned, I just got it last week. I really haven't had time to review it in depth. We're going through, there seems to be a number of issues around images, certain kinds of philosophical foundational elements about how we structure the relationship. I have questions about the city of Colwood and how it relates to Indigenous communities in terms of heritage. Like, I still don't understand exactly how that works. And, I think those are questions that I think Maria's, her work has triggered a bunch of questions for us I think we need to discuss. And, taking this forward to Indigenous communities at this point, whereas it might be a good gesture to get their involvement, it may also show that we haven't necessarily thought this through to the extent that we should have. So that's where I feel like it's a journey we're on. So that's what I'm thinking right now.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any other discussion before we ask
I would second Jeff's comments entirely. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So, is anyone prepared to make a motion regarding the report? You have a few choices. You can make a motion to send this to council as it is. Send this to council with some changes that you've noted, that I hope Maria has noted or can note from the recording, or ask for it to be revised and brought back to us after the revisions at a later date. So I'll make those three options available. Anyone can make any motion they like, though.
At this point,
You muted yourself, Mark.
sorry, I would motion that we take the latter choice that Ken put forward, and that we table this report for a more fulsome conversation amongst the committee specifically, so we can get some of those philosophical questions Jeffrey brought up dealt with, because they're fundamental to how we shape our strategy, because that's what we're doing. And it is a conversation. There isn't an end time necessarily, other than budget cycles and so forth. So I would encourage deferring moving forward this until we're going to have a more fulsome review by the committee specifically.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Jeff. Any discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair, can I just jump in?
You certainly may, Ian.
For
Yeah.
the discussion on the motion. So under the bylaw that the commission works under, the commission has the ability to make recommendations to council. So I have some wording that it would encapsulate, I think, what was conveyed within the context of that bylaw. If you wish, I can share that.
Certainly, please do.
Okay, that the Heritage Commission recommend that staff consider the input of the Heritage Commission members on the draft Colwood Heritage Strategy at their special meeting of May 31st, 2022 to the Heritage Commission and return to the Heritage Commission and Council with a revised draft before seeking First Nation, public, and stakeholder comment. I can bring that up on the screen if that would be.
No, it's okay. Mark said that's good with him. Jeff, you okay for seconding that?
Yeah, let's see it on the screen there, Ian, if we can, please.
I may be sharing the wrong screen here. One sec.
Yeah, no, that was it.
Did you see it there?
Yeah.
No, it was there.
It showed a different. Sorry. Okay, so did you see my cursor?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I'll hold with Mark with my second.
Okay.
And I just wanted to comment. I think I like Ian's draft slightly better than what had been previously proposed, because I think that now that the consultants have heard some of our conversation, for them to do some more work on it before it comes back to us is a good idea, as opposed to just reviewing what we've already just reviewed.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question on this. It seems to be unclear. It says in return to the Heritage Commission and Council. It's not clear what that means.
Yeah, that
I
is.
mean, it almost seems to refer to a joint meeting of Heritage Commission and Council.
Thank
Yes.
you, Member Baxter, and through the chair. So that wording is just to reflect the role of the commission as a advisory body to council, in that if this comes to the Heritage Commission, a recommendation from the commission would then go to council. I think that was what my intention for that.
Perhaps we could clarify that by saying and return to the Heritage Commission for a recommendation to council.
Sure.
Okay, everyone's in agreement with this?
Is there time for some discussion before we vote, or?
Oh, yes, definitely. Is the motion agreeable to Mark? And the seconder, Jeff?
Yes, thanks.
Any discussion, please?
I thought it might be good if we just clarified what is the process, because is it a point where we as a commission should talk about this and then provide our collective feedback to to Maria and the consulting team, as opposed to each of us, providing our ideas? Because I think, this could get a bit circular if we don't have consensus amongst the commission on some of these elements. And that might help bring this one to a close. So what I would suggest is that we actually meet before we actually ask Maria for another draft. Is that where you're meeting, Sandra?
No, I think I was meaning the opposite of what you just said, Jeff. Sorry.
I was supporting what Jeff was going to say, so I like what Jeff was saying.
I just thought that perhaps with her wisdom and professionalism after hearing the comments, that some of those sections that she would have heard from us that we know have to be changed, that one paragraph that you identified, Mark, that we don't need to talk about those anymore, because there was consensus that it was offensive. So I'm just wondering if she couldn't at least make a start on that before we meet again. But I could be wrong.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in. So I think in the proposed, so this is the wording I provided was to improve the wording that was discussed by the commission members, but that it would provide an iterative step in the sense that it's stating that the revised draft would come to the commission again. So that would be an opportunity to discuss in an iterative process. I also mentioned that the draft document very much is the product of the project team that involves both our consultants and the staff, internal staff. So just to highlight that is a, the document is a product of the teams.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Call the question. All in favor of the motion?
I think Maria had a comment.
No, I'm sorry, Maria, do you have another comment? You're muted, Maria.
Try again. I just have to understand, maybe following your motion, the process moving forward. So I appreciate that I definitely did remember that one thing Sandra had mentioned, that you had mentioned before, and I apologize for not putting in there, but I don't want to be doing a draft and missing anything. So I would want to understand, is all the feedback that we received today all the feedback that we're going to get at this time? So that's what I have concerns about, because it's a lot to keep revising. So what your process will be around this, what the process will be.
Well, I agree that it can be a lot to be revising, but it is a very important document. And I think we want to get it right, or as right as we possibly can. As I noted, I tried to get through all your references and unable to get some of them sourced, mind you, and it takes a little time. But, you know, the one on Indigenous planning, which was reference number 40, if I remember right, was a very interesting paper. It's available online. Any of us can read it. And we need time to read it and try to understand it. Sometimes to make decisions on short information is not the best thing to do. Sometimes it's better to wait a little bit and understand more carefully. It's, I don't know if anybody has read The Dawn of Everything, a recent book on cultural history, but it points out that First Nations, certainly in the eastern part of North America, were very careful in their deliberations. Everyone spoke at length. Everyone talked very carefully. Oh, let's perhaps follow that precept and try and understand more. No hurry, which they criticized the French for.
Hi, Mr. Chair. It's Ian here. May I make another suggestion? Certainly staff will take recommendations and direction from council to get the document right and take as much time as council sees fit to make that happen. I think the concern is that we're capturing all of the commentary on this current draft from the commission in an efficient way. And it may not be that efficient for us to simply take the input of this meeting and then bring it forward with a revised draft to another commission meeting. So certainly the commission could have a second motion that specifies specific issues to be raised at the next Heritage Commission. When a decision-making body is deferring a decision on an item, it's best practice for that body to specify what information is required to be brought to bear to make the decision. So if the commission's able to describe that in more detail or recommend that we hold another meeting that would focus on specific issues, that those are options.
Okay, I know I sent some comments to you before, Ian. I'm not sure that they were fully encapsulated in here, and I understand that. Jeff, you have some comments?
Well, I'm just thinking, Ian, we are breaking new ground with this. And I think that there are many questions here that I think we need to talk to yourself as staff about what it is that the city of Colwood plans to do. And what, because I think there is a comment that Josh made earlier about overreach. And I do think that this is one of these situations where we need to step back and understand the scope and depth of this particular strategy piece, because there's certain things that we could be committing to here that are setting aside the cost, which is a significant issue to set aside, but some of the philosophical issues that we're dealing with around our reach into Indigenous communities and to basically as a commission do stuff in that Indigenous heritage realm. To me, it's problematic to kind of think that one through. From what I see of the First Peoples Cultural Council, they're basically saying, no, we'll do it. We'll look after ourselves, don't help us. So I feel like we're in their territory in a way. So obviously we have to do something, but it's not clear what. And I think that there are issues for the council, and I can't tell you right off the bat, the next 5 minutes, exactly what that list is. So that's why I think we need as a commission, and if it was just normal setting, I think if we were able to come around the table and just discuss it, walk through the document together and get a sense of each other's assumptions as to what we think needs to be done and what certain terms mean, right? So I guess that's what I'm feeling right now, because otherwise we're just going to create a potential hornet's nest of issues, right? So
I would agree with Jeffrey, and I'm unfortunately I have another meeting to attend. I'll have to leave now. I've made my comments left in the comments. I know the motion's mine, and I won't be here to vote.
Yeah,
But,
so why don't we vote? Why don't we vote before you go?
We can vote and
Okay.
discuss, yeah.
Yeah, but Jeffrey makes a very valid point, and to support Ken's point, nothing is lost with taking the time for this committee to come back, this commission to come back and do its due diligence and get the strategy strategically positioned to represent the voice of this community.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to make one comment. I am terrified that we create cultural heritage apartheid. That they end up with two separate streams of heritage as for humanity anywhere. So it's one of my great concerns these days. So I'm going to, without further ado, call the question. All in favor of the motion as presented by Ian and Mark? Opposed, if any? Hearing none, the motion is passed. Thank you, Mark. Any further discussion? Ian?
Michael speaking there. Can't hear him.
No, I'm sorry, Michael.
Sorry, I'm trying to speak through a mute. Maria asked if the feedback at today's meeting was all the feedback she was going to get before having to rewrite. And two of the commission shook their heads, which means no, there is going to be more feedback. But so far we haven't recommended to council on what the means of that additional feedback would be, which I think we actually need to do. So I think there's what I'm expecting is somebody will recommend that we have an interim meeting where this big discussion that you all need occurs, and then provides further feedback to the consultant.
Do you want us just to list a bunch? Is that what you
Well,
be helpful here?
It sounds like you need another meeting to do that, unless we're going to do all of the discussion.
I mean, we
here
can
and
list
now.
for starters just by going through the table of contents and just speaking to certain headers, if that would be useful for the minutes.
Oh, Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
so if I could maybe suggest an option.
Thank you, Ian.
The current motion could go forward to council just with respect to the how we're managing the actual document itself, and how this would essentially guide the city's actions relative to First Nations engagement. A secondary motion that would be recommending a additional workshop involving Heritage Commission members on the draft heritage strategy could be something that Commission considered as a follow-up motion. I think that's what I'm hearing is being requested.
Well, I think that we've had this document before us now for 4 or 5 days. I still have trouble printing it out, so because it switches from narrow to wide halfway through. So do I put wide paper in or narrow paper in? That's a technical problem on my part. And as I say, I have really not fully reviewed all the references as pertains to the document, and I would like the opportunity to do so. Ian, on some of the other committees I've sat on in the past, the planning department would like to control all conversations between committee members. In other words, if I'm going to talk to Jeffrey about anything in this document, I have to pass it through you first. How does Colwood feel about that?
That's a great question, Mr. Chair. Certainly, there is a concern around there being deliberations amongst committee members that should be part of a public Heritage Commission meeting. That being said, I think one-on-one conversation between members, as would normally happen through the course of your lives, is something that we can't pretend to control or even want to restrict people's discussions among themselves. I think key for us here is to understand how best staff and the project team can meet the expectations of the commission in terms of taking your input and taking it into consideration for an additional set of amendments, whether that's through a distillation of the comments that were made at this meeting or through a follow-up meeting that would happen before us bringing back another draft. We're happy to accommodate whichever recommendation the commission sees fit.
Thank you. If the members would wish a follow-up meeting to discuss this further and in depth, when would they like to have it?
In the commission offices, I think would be wisest. Is Ian, is this a formal meeting? Obviously, it's a formal meeting and we have it in the commission chamber there, the council chamber.
Yeah, through the chair. As commission's aware, we held 2 workshops that involved Heritage Commission members as part of the research into the heritage strategy. That is one means of which that we can have discussions that are not restricted through the normal rules of a Heritage Commission meeting. That being said, it's important for us not to be holding meetings behind closed doors that should be part of the public process. So would be careful not to suggest to doing that, but instead follow the track that we did previously, where it's a workshop involving multiple parties, including members of the Heritage Commission, but not a commission meeting itself.
Yeah, sure.
Where does that leave us?
Do you want to write up a motion, Ian, to that effect, or is that something that we would just agree to do? Or
certainly. So a follow-up motion to the one that was already passed could be that the Coed Heritage recommend to council that a 3rd Heritage Strategy workshop involving Heritage Commission members be held prior to the revisions being made to the draft Heritage Strategy document.
Okay, I'll make the motion. Do I have a seconder? Second by Sandra. Discussion of the motion. Maria, please.
I'm just asking to understand the process. So I did hear a bit of feedback today. If there's going to be a workshop, would you want us to take some of the more obvious feedback that we heard today, put that into the document and workshop that, or just to understand the best way to move forward here? Like there's some images we can remove, there's text we can remove, that kind of thing.
Well, any revisions would certainly be advantageous to us, because then we won't be discussing the same thing twice.
Right. I just don't want to, I just want to convolute the process, I guess.
Right. Ian, I leave it to you to set the dates and the places and the usual things.
Yeah, I think it would be appropriate, Mr. Chair, for staff to outline implications associated with these recommendations to council in a brief report. There's obviously implications to the timing and cost of the project, and we could certainly touch on that for council's consideration. I think that's part of what's driving Ms. Dambro's comments in terms of these additional steps needing to be integrated into the work plan, so we can outline that in our reporting to council.
Okay, because we've had some members leaving early, will you communicate with them at the earliest opportunity as to what they may expect in the future?
Certainly. So we do just have quorum, so we can vote on another.
Well, hard to tell when you have a quorum. 3 is a quorum now. Okay.
It's Mr. Chair, it's 5 members, including our council representative.
Oh, our council. Michael, I'm sorry. You're included. Okay, I'm going to suggest that we adjourn the meeting.
Good.
I would recommend to those council or commission members still sitting to review the document again and take a look at the references. They're very interesting. If you can find them, please read them. If you find one in an obscure site, please email it to me. I love references. I have a hobby reading theses, and theses are pages and pages of references. And boy, there's more information in the references than there ever was in the theses. So I got lots of time on my hands, you can tell. I'm going to call the meeting to be adjourned.
Jenny's got a question there.
I'm sorry, Jenny.
So before we adjourn the meeting, I wonder if I could go back to the beginning of the agenda, since I was unable to be here at the beginning of the meeting. I just have an item of new business I wanted to share with everybody.
Okay.
So I received a letter recently from a woman in the UK who owns the original Colwood house that used to belong to Captain Langford. She's writing a history of the home, so was reaching out to the city of Colwood randomly via me at Hatley Park. So it was a very sweet letter. So I coincidentally am visiting the UK in the summer and happen to live not half an hour away from the actual location of the house. And she's offered to give me a tour of it and share the history that she's managed to build about Captain Edwards Langford. So I was wondering if it would be possible if on behalf of the city of Colwood, or at least on behalf of the commission, I could present her with a copy of the Colwood Chronicles as a gift from us.
The Colwood which, Jenny?
The Colwood Chronicles, William Sylvester's book.
Yes.
That sounds great. Very nice.
Wonderful idea.
Okay, I'm sure that staff has 1 or 2 copies left.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, if the commission wanted to, certainly, I think it's within your remit to make a motion to that effect, if and vote on it.
So I will make a motion that the Colwood Heritage Commission recommend that Colwood planning staff find within its box underneath the counter a copy of the Colwood Chronicles to give to Jenny, to be presented to the current owner of the historic Langford House in England.
Second that
Seconded by Jenny. All in favor? Everybody, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I should just confirm the second potential motion that I read regarding a workshop wasn't officially made by a member of the commission and wasn't voted on. So I'm just clarify that wasn't the intention of the commission.
Okay, well,
I think we did. I think I thought that Ken had made that motion and Sandra had seconded it.
Okay, apologies, I may be mistaken.
I'm still at the point of adjournment. Anything else? Motion to adjourn, please. Thank you, Jeffrey. Seconded by Jenny. All in favor, done. Thank you. I will be reading a lot over the next week or so.
Great. Thanks, Maria. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I